I think we're going to go ahead and get the ag discussion started.
I don't want to go rogue because I know comparison is too bad. What if it comes up? There's no
I know.
well, a couple. So,
Yeah.
So I'd like to start by welcoming you all and thank you for sitting in on the discussion about free market and the farm. My name is Pam Lewison. I am the new director for the Center of Agricultural Research at the Policy Center. In my other time, I am a farmer in Moses Lake. So the discussion today is not just about policy, but it is about our life and our livelihood. So I'd like to thank my panelists for coming today and hopefully having some fruitful discussion. We have April Clayton. Microphones are not my favorite thing, Kevin. So we have April Clayton, James Alford, and Drew Killian, and they will all offer some different perspectives, both on farm and off, about things that are going on and what we can hopefully do to change the political landscape for agriculture.
Hello, my name is April Clayton. Me and my husband run 160 acres of organic apples and cherries in Aranda, Washington. So if you're not familiar with that, it's Central State, right above East Wenatchee. We have 2 kids. My personal background is I married into farming. I started out my career thinking that I wanted to teach chemistry. I have my undergraduate degree is from Florida State University in biochemistry. I then went on to University of California, Davis, where I got my PhD in analytical chemistry. I just completed the Partners in Advocacy Leadership with the American Farm Bureau, so I'm a trained advocate for agriculture. And what I'd really like to talk with you guys about today is tariffs are bad, yes, but the state legislation will kill our farms quicker than tariffs will. This past legislative session, it wasn't just, there was a bill proposed for, reporting slavery on our farms. There was another bill which would have required us to pay an extra fee on top of the already federal H-2A programs. But it's not just those legislations. Like we heard in the last session, the gas tax, the rough tax. In rural areas, we're the ones who drive the furthest. This is going to hit us the hardest. So we really have to become active with legislators. We have to talk to them. But talking to them isn't enough because they're following their constituents. So we really have to get active on social media. We have to let the urban areas know what's happening on our farm. And some of the easiest ways to do that is, take pictures of your farms, sunrise in the morning. All your media posts don't have to be political, they can be, hey, this is what life is like on our farm. And it's not so much, it's so you can reach your friends. I mean, not all of your friends on Facebook have been to your farm. Your kids' teachers may not know that you're a farmer. You just want to let them know that you are a farmer. Become the trusted source for them instead of social media. Don't let the environmental working group explain to your friends what's happening on your farms. So it's important that we get out there and get active. So how can we get over this? How can we, make more money? Basically, direct marketing, and let's bypass this low market because the tariffs are creating a surplus, which is depressing our prices. One way to get over that, like I said, direct market. You don't have to sell all of your crops, a small portion of them. So direct, being involved on social media is going to help you get that audience. So what are some different ways that you can get that audience? One of them is hook up with local photographers. Professional photographers are always looking for new venues, new places to take pictures. And we have beautiful farms. Everyone likes to have those perfect family pictures or, their engagement picture, somewhere beautiful, in a canola field, in an apple blossom field, do you have Do you have livestock? Those baby goats, those baby cows, they look so cute in pictures. And then when you have these people on your farm, you have the opportunity to tell them what's happening on your farm. Also, another way you could go is chefs, local chefs in the area. Hook up with local chefs, donate food and have them advertise, hey, this came from this farm and look how great it is, look how fresh it is. So those are some other ways. Also, when you pick these photographers or chefs that you might work with, go ahead and check them out on social media. How many followers do they have? Obviously, the more followers they have, the more advertising you'll get for your farm. Another way to help earn money for your farm, your children. Get them involved in FFA. Those fair sales that they have of the goats and the pigs and the cattle, that's income that can be used to pay for their college, which saves money for your farm. So, let's get those kids involved, because everyone loves to see a picture of a little kid, on that tractor. So that's another way to generate more interest in your farm. I know I'm kind of getting done early, but one thing I do want to leave you guys with, 2% of the population is farmers. 2% of the American population also believes they've been abducted by aliens. They have an entire day on the History Channel dedicated to ancient aliens. We have 1 hour Tuesday night dedicated to American farm. So it's up to us to get out there. Like I said, you don't have to be political. You don't have to, really get in there. Just be that trusted source for your friends, for your family, for your kids' teachers, for the person sitting in the grocery store. If you see them looking at beef, not knowing to go with grass-fed or grain-fed. If you're a cattle farmer, man, tell them, ask them, what do you think? What do you want to know? And you'll be surprised. They'll actually, warm up to you and ask questions. So before I go real quick, how many farmers do I have here? Good number, excellent. How many commodity farmers? Commodities? Excellent. Vegetables? Fabulous. Tree fruit? Right on. So yeah, just think about the different areas and the beautiful areas of your farm that you have. Even if it's just a green, great pasture, those are things that urban people don't have. So get active on social media, ask your kids how to use it and how to buffer and how to explain, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook and everything else out there. Good luck and thank you.
Hi, I am James Alford, president at the Franklin County Farm Bureau. My wife and I, we also farm along with my parents, help manage their farm. In addition to some other agriculture ventures, we also own a spray business where we chemical nutrient apply. And in addition to the potato farming, we do grow some seed crops. So we have a little bit of diversification there. I started farming back in 2007, and in that short amount of time, I have learned a lot. And a couple of those things was that you always learn, for those of you who are farmers, you know that agriculture is not for the faint of heart. When I was young, someone had asked my mom, and said, well, what are you doing to get your son into farming? And she said something along the lines of, why would I, we'll see what happens, but why would I want to encourage, my son to get into an occupation that is extremely stressful? You have to worry about the weather constantly, things that are out of your control. The long hours, low commodity prices, spending your off seasons, getting your one paycheck for the year and then going and spending it again on taxes and then trying to secure financing and purchasing equipment and dealing with immigration and labor issues and dealing with all of the government regulations and agencies. And so for me to be, I'm a third generation farmer, and for a farm to make it to the third generation, that's about a 10% probability that would happen from the first generation. And now my wife and I, we have 3 sons and 1 daughter, and it would be a blessing to have them on the farm, especially if they say they want to work on the farm. If they have the right personality to do so, that would be great. But to be, like April had said, 2% of the population, and then him have about a 2% chance, he's starting to have the same statistics as, becoming, an NFL or a basketball player than he does a successful fourth-generation farmer. So some of the things that I've learned that help with trying to be successful is we do things that we can to mitigate our exposure to market volatility. Those are things that we can control, whether that's only growing crops that we have contracted or contracting them at times where they might be more profitable than others. Also, pre-purchasing fertilizer, chemical. There's strategies that we do that help our farm try to hedge their bets. And there are a lot of things that we can't control. And that would be an outside force that me in my role at Farm Bureau, I've learned how important that is. And that's trying to be proactive rather than retroactive against certain things. And I have my top three that I would consider, but my favorite group is an environmental extremist, which I learned who those were when I was a little kid at a Remove the Dams protest. And you learn when you're farming how important these natural resources are. And for someone to think that as a farmer that you weren't the first and you're not the best conservationist out there, they're extremely uninformed or ill-informed. So at Franklin County Farm Bureau, we actually have an event called the Farmer for a Day. We invite people over from the west side out of the legislature, and we put them in a pickup truck, and we drive them around. And anything they want to see or ask, we'll go do. Some people say, oh, I want to see what a wheat farm looks like, or I want to drive a tractor. We allow them to do those things. But in the meantime, we're building a relationship. Right now, it's not the best political climate, especially in Washington State, for farming. The last session kind of did prove that. All of the stuff that came down the pipeline, all the stuff that was at least made it to committee, maybe not out of committee, it really should scare everyone here, farming or not. You have people that are running an agricultural committee that aren't from an agricultural background, deciding policy that directly impacts us. And our best way to do that, and it was actually, and I have to give a plug, I don't know if Representative Joe Schmick is here or not, he gave me advice, and he encourages us to do our Farmer for a Day event and get out there and try as best we can to get these West Side legislators who have no idea, Republican or Democrat or not, if you haven't been exposed to a farm, we try to get you over. And our best bet, and it's been very successful, is to make those people essentially a well-known, not necessarily like a friend, but we expose them to the farm, and we become the first steps of building a personal relationship with them. And in doing that, we've had a good success because when bad bills come to committee, we can go testify, or we can call, or we can send a letter. They have a name with a face, and they have a story that represents what we're telling them. We can talk to them all day long about irrigation and chemical applications and farm labor issues, or whether or not we're slave drivers, which we're not. But they were accusing us of doing such. If anything, they need to put more legislation together that supports and protects our own crops that are grown here in the state rather than importing cheaper organic crops from out of the country. That's supporting slave labor. The average person in asparagus here in Washington State usually makes around $15 to $20 an hour. In Mexico, it's $7 to $8 a day. Yet, due to bad trade deals like NAFTA, we've had our asparagus industry decimated. And I know everyone wants to talk about the trade war, and I'm not going to say too much about the trade war with China. In the short term, there is kind of an impact negatively on the bottom line, but it's pretty small. If we can do something that's proactive and sets a longer-term platform with good policy, I guess we'll see what happens. But I would actually take it a step farther since I have some time. So in addition to bad legislation and environmental extremists, the third thing out of my top three that I feel has the biggest impact to farmers and has ever had the biggest impact to my bottom line and to all my neighbors' bottom line, whether they're hay farmers, potato farmers, is unionized port system. The fact that you can have your whole state's economy ran on agricultural exports could be shut down just because a group of people decide that they want to do that, and there's no protection for us as farmers or in our economy that can prevent that from happening, and that the state won't allow any new private development of a port or avenue for us to ship our products has had a bigger bottom inline impact than anything else. Trade war, it's pretty small. Any other policies that came out of legislators so far, pretty small. But a unionized port that is not modernizing to the same standards that they are over in Europe or in other areas, we're just holding ourselves back. So going forward, there's only so much we can do to hedge our bets and to protect ourselves from outside market volatility. But there's a lot that we can all do, and this is why you're all here, to work with the legislator to inform people who are uninformed about whatever industry it is, but with us for agriculture, so that they are aware of anything that they're doing that may be detrimental or have a detrimental impact to farming. And in that, if any of you do want to get involved or have any interest, our Farm Bureau website is fcfb.farm. It's a great opportunity if another local Farm Bureau or another agricultural group wants to try to do something similar. We have a great model put together, and it's had a big impact. Outside of that, I would like to also mention that besides with the social media, like April had alluded to, in telling our story, when you go to the grocery store and you support local and you support buying domestic product, you are essentially casting your vote for whether or not you want a farm to succeed or to fail. We're at a competitive disadvantage to outside companies or outside countries that import in cheaper products, cheaper produce. And so these are all things that you guys can do to get involved and in your daily life and do to have a positive impact on farming. So with that, I'll turn it over, but if anyone has more specific questions after, feel free to ask. Thank you.
I'm very grateful to go last. I have known the Clayton family, and I just got to know James just a second ago, but I've heard many great things about his family. You don't know this, but it's very difficult. Some of you do, but it's very difficult to grow organic cherries. The Clayton family, though, they've mastered it. And I know that they've had difficult times, but they have mastered it through thick and thin. And I'm very grateful for their example. I'm very grateful for these farmers and producers that are excellent examples. While they were talking, a line that my father told me all the time in high school came to mind. And it's the reason why we come to these sorts of summits or conferences, right, is to learn from one another. But being a stubborn teenager, my father used to tell me all the time, Drew, you don't have to stick your head in a garbage can to know it stinks. Trust the guy that's already smelled it. And what I like about conferences like this is we can learn from one another, and we can implement things and avoid sticking our head in the proverbial garbage can, right? Today I want to talk about something that I believe, and it's up for debate, of course, but I believe the government got right, and that is federal crop insurance. I've been doing it for about 13 years or so. My father did it before, so again, while I was a stubborn teenager, I remember hearing him clamoring about the apple policy or the potato policy, etc. So I've been around it for a long time. There are some flaws in it, absolutely, but I believe they got it right, especially allowing the private industry to deliver it. So I wanted to share a couple of thoughts regarding that and some observations I've had over the past 12 to 13 years. In all the different acts, the Crop Insurance Acts of 1938, 1980, 1994, and all the variations and farm bills thereof, there's been a very common theme through that legislature, and that has been that the purpose of crop insurance is to preserve American agriculture through a sound system of crop insurance. I want to highlight two words there, preserve and sound. In my experience, crop insurance has done a very good job in preserving American agriculture in one context. We'll talk a little bit about that. But the soundness of the policies, the soundness of your crop insurance policies, I want to talk about for a second. Soundness to me means that it's properly set up, that you have a crop insurance agent that is aligned with you, that there is free communication constantly going back and forth. I guess in summary, I can say, do not treat your crop insurance like your life insurance policy, or your health insurance policy, or your car insurance policy. Those policies are meant to be easily renewed. Crop insurance needs to be somewhat difficult to renew. And I'll explain what I mean in a second. A couple of years ago, I was at a conference where Senator Jerry Moran out of Kansas, and Pat Roberts as well, was at, and they were speaking about their support for the crop insurance industry, and had occasion to be off to the side and have a side conversation with Senator Moran. And he said something that has stuck with me to this very day. It's right there. Second only to the U.S. military, a domestic food safety net, or now that I say that out loud, he probably said farm safety net, is of utmost importance to our national security. He also, kind of tongue-in-cheek, made a little joke. He said, I've never read or seen a people riot on full stomachs. I think that's true. I think we can all agree to that. Now, why I said at the very beginning that the federal government has gotten the crop insurance thing done right is what I'm going to show on these next two slides. Now, numbers tell a certain story. I don't mean to lead you down a certain path, because it's debatable whether we should, as American taxpayers, be paying this much for a federal crop insurance system. But here are what the numbers, and I'm sorry, and we're not going to focus on each number. The small print is not meant to be that small, but there's a very, very specific reason why I've included these numbers. As you can see, I pulled it right off the USDA Risk Management Agency's website as of just a few days ago. What you see here on the left is the crop name, the crops that actually have a multi-peril crop insurance policy. Then the next column over is the total coverage in terms of dollars written over that 5-year period. The next column over is what the growers actually paid for said coverage. Remember, if you don't know, federal crop insurance, there's a gross premium, there's a subsidy. One minus the other equals what the grower actually paid for it. Then the losses paid over that same 5-year period, the most recent 5 years, and what the grower paid loss ratio is. Very simple math. If I'm a producer and I pay $1 in premium and I get paid $1.10 back, the loss ratio in my particular case is 110%. 10% increase on my money, which I never should have said. That's a moral principle that I just violated. Crop insurance is never an investment. Do not look at it that way. But the numbers here are going to tell a different kind of story. On the far right-hand side, you see a grower paid loss ratio, 641%. 453, 350, 276, all the way down. The whole slide here shows a loss ratio of above 200% plus. The next slide here, and I just want to point out some of the crops. You have processing beans, flax, whole farm revenue protection, alfalfa seed, etc., etc., etc. Wheat is on there the past 5 years, 235% loss ratio. For every dollar a producer's paying in, they're getting $2.35 back. This slide, though, makes it sound like federal crop insurance is a direct payment. It's not. That's why I like it. I grew up in a very conservative household, and being in the federal crop insurance was a bit controversial sometimes. But that being said, you have skin in the game. You are paying a premium, and you have a policy that's legitimate, and you can go to a banker and say, this is my guarantee. The next slide here simply shows the crops that have lesser loss ratios, and there's many reasons why. I want to highlight one. The potato policy here is honestly not a very good policy. Okay? It needs refinement. Do you have a crop insurance agent that is able to sit down with you and articulate in great detail, as much as you want, why certain policies should be bought up, and certain policies there might be other options for them? These sorts of numbers are clear as day and tell us the truth. What I'm exceptionally grateful for is that losses paid out over the past 5 years, $696 million. I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, this is just Washington State. This isn't a national number or anything like that. This is just in Washington State, with a grower loss ratio of 226. You might be saying, Drew, I understand insurance, and if the premiums they're collecting is $1 and the premiums out, or the losses out are $2.26, eventually the insurance company goes broke. This isn't sustainable. Just remember, I think that articulates why the inherent risks of farming would price insurance so high that it wouldn't be feasible. And I guess my point is there needs to be an intermediary. There needs to be something that comes in there and pays the difference to keep this thing sound. I just want to highlight again that it's very important that you don't treat crop insurance like your auto insurance, especially life insurance. You don't want life insurance to pay out, right? But federal crop insurance, though, you have to pay attention to it. And you have to have somebody aligned with you just as much as you are in the survivability of your farm. Because crop insurance can go awry very quickly if it's not set up correctly. I think that's enough time for me. I could go on forever. I've been living and breathing this for 12, 13 years, and I'm very passionate about it. It should be something you're passionate about too, in my humble opinion. Thank you very much.
Oh, good. You guys talked short. That means there's lots of time for questions. So we're going to open this up to question and answer session. So fire away, and we've got some microphones that'll roam around, and I'll point to you, and we'll get this thing going. Oh, you guys are very shy. Is there no questions at all? Oh, Sulani in the back there.
I'd like to hear a comment about the problem of country of origin labeling, and if people do want to buy U.S. produced U.S. products, we are not able to do that when it comes to beef. They can, right now, the rules allow something to come into the country, and all that happens is the Brazilian beef is rewrapped. It's now stamped product of USA. How can consumers have an impact on changing that federal legislation in the face of pressure from the 4 large international, multinational meat packing companies?
So cool, which you're referring to, it is a very controversial subject, especially within the beef industry, because of heavy investments, even with United States farmers in Canada. As far as it being important to the consumer of where their product came from, it should be clear, and the consumer, who is the one who makes the demands, is always the one who wins. Due to all the food safety programs we have in place now, and all of the sustainability audits and all of these things that are increased overhead for farmers, they were pushed on by the consumer. So I would say for the consumer, who I believe is more powerful than the lobbyist group of that beef industry, would have to make it known that that's important to them. Obviously, it is important to a lot of people in how we structure our trade deals. And like with the cool issue, the labeling issues really comes down to, we talked about before, people getting involved, making sure that their legislators know what's important to them, and the details of the labeling issue are very complex, and they're essentially not representative of the whole beef industry's view. I know in Franklin County there are a lot of farmers who want the country of origin labeling, and then there are some industry-wide that obviously they don't. So I don't have an answer as far as how to solve that problem, but I would say that the consumer is more powerful than the industry itself, and the consumer is who drives the change. And the best way to do that is just make your voice known. You're going to be heard.
Another person who we need to let people know too is your grocery store. Go to your local grocery store and tell them you want to see more American produce, whether it be beef, vegetables, whatever, because the grocery store is going to follow what their consumers want. And the grocery stores don't know if you're farmers or not, so go pester them.
Up here, Tyler.
You were speaking of communication, telling our story, and great presentation. I love the comment that there's really nothing that can harm us in agriculture worse than our own state. So I would agree with that, especially in this last legislative session. One of the things that I wanted to ask you is many counties, almost all the counties in the state of Washington are participating in the Voluntary Stewardship program. And I think that that's one very large piece of telling our story, because a lot of consumers that make those decisions aren't aware of really what farmers are doing to protect our natural resources, our critical areas, and the commitment of all the good things agriculture's done that no one knows about. And so I really appreciate if you could maybe mention anything that you felt about how important that might be in social media or communications. And then also I just wanted to mention on the country of origin, oftentimes one of our biggest stories that isn't told is what are the conditions that those other countries are engaging in that we would never allow in our own country, and yet we'll buy that beef, and it's never being told. What is the wage of those employees? What are the farm practices in Brazil? What are the farm practices in Mexico? What have we mandated and regulated for our own agricultural producers in this country, and yet we'll import and say it's okay and never ask the question of other countries. So I just wanted to say I'm pretty passionate about country of origin as well, even though I'm a dairy producer. One other comment that was made was the tariff wars. I can tell you as a commodity producer, all of our milk goes to a co-op, so we don't really have the choice of doing a direct marketing option. But I'll tell you, just because there's a home for our milk didn't mean that I had a good milk check from that home for my milk. And so I'm all about seeing how this tariff war ends up, because it can't be worse than $9 milk or even $12 milk for us. So anyway, thank you.
So how many people here are familiar with VSP, Voluntary Stewardship Program? Okay, real quick, for those who aren't, legislation came down basically that in previous years farmers had been exempt from critical areas intersecting with their farm. Basically, they believed we had good, best steward practices, what we do. Well, there were a couple of bad actors who weren't, and so what was decided that county by county, each county would decide their own best practices for critical areas intersecting with agriculture. For us in Douglas County, we have a lot of endangered species, which isn't so much the fact in other counties. So what we've done is we've compiled a list of best practices that we have on our farm, and we get credit for them. And the state recognizes this. So a lot of the, like Foster Creek Conservation in Douglas County, they put out, I think, monthly newsletters, and they highlight and spotlight each farmer and what practices they're using on their farm. So, you know, one thing that we can do as farmers or even as consumers is go to these conservation, the county conservation, and there you can get a list and find out what good practices farmers are using. And also for the farmers in the room who aren't too familiar with VSP, the conservation districts do have money to help you on your farm to implement some of these best practices. I know that I think they budgeted $1,000 per county to help implement these practices, so definitely get involved. So yeah, I think the rest of the comment from there.
One of the bigger points about VSP2, other than the critical area ordinances, is that agriculture used to be exempt, but now it's not. And so if your county, I should say, is not participating in the voluntary stewardship program, you are somewhat exposed to potential litigation due to any critical area perceived violation from any third-party group. And so by being in the voluntary stewardship program, it's completely voluntary, but by taking measures to make sure that your county stays within this system, it's all about participation. So besides even letting other people know, it comes down to every county making sure all the farmers are participating to make sure that our critical areas are maintained and enhanced, in also our farms also stay viable. It's kind of a two-part thing. The legislation that was passed says that the farms have to stay viable as well as the critical areas maintained at the point that they were in 2011. And being a part of something that's voluntary, not mandated upon you, is nice. It's something different out of the legislature. But in addition to that, it allows us protection in terms of any lawsuit that would come out of a critical area ordinance perceived violation.
Thank you. I need to say, first of all, I come from the banking industry, and we financed a lot of the farmers across the four-state Northwest region. And we see a lot of people buying farmland that aren't farmers. And I know there's a third-generation farmer up there, and I know as your children grow up, you need to expand your farm. Would you just comment from your experiences or the experiences of your neighbors and what the higher prices of farmland have done to keeping farms in the families and so forth?
Yeah, so in any industry that is successful, you would sometimes attribute to it a high barrier of entry. It's going to make sure that you don't have a lot of competition. Unfortunately, in farming, there is a consolidation underway, and there always kind of has been, that the bigger farm absorbs the small one. And a lot of that is due to barrier of entry or cost of operation and margin control. Margins in farming can be, during many years, razor thin, if not completely negative. And bigger corporation, the bigger margin they usually have, and also the more ability they have to ride out any type of storm, like with milk prices and lower commodity prices in the Midwest. So, but you were specifically referring to land, and in my area, my wife and I, we own land, my family owns land, so it's kind of like a double-edged sword. I like having a high land price because it's worth something, but at the same time, it hasn't necessarily translated into higher rent. A lot of the crops that are grown in the area drive where the rent per acre goes. But as far as access to land, trying to go out and buy land as a new beginning farmer or pass that land on to our children, the biggest expense would be to purchase that land. A lot of times your mortgage payment on a 35% down 20-year loan is going to be well in excess of what your land rent payment would be if you were just renting ground from the landlord down the road. Problem is if you just depend your whole life renting land, you won't have anything other than your equipment. And so you're kind of farming for the iron at that point. You have nothing to hand down. You have nothing to pass on. And then once they pass it on, they'll tax you with capital gains and everything else. But I think that solid land prices are good, and I think there's a story behind that too, in that the land, especially in Washington State, and I'm from the Columbia Basin, we have great access to water. You see some of the legislation that comes out in California in terms of access to water. Water's our lifeblood. Without it, we don't survive. We don't have an industry. And the reason why our land is so expensive is because it's some of the best, and you have people being drove from other areas wanting to purchase it because it's a safe long-term investment. So like I said, it's a double-edged sword. We want to be able to have farming affordable, but at the same time, you also you have investments and assets that you want valued at market.
And just a side note for that too, for the farmers in here specifically, I know this isn't something you want to think about, but start thinking about succession planning now. You have to start thinking about giving the farm to your kids now, because if you die without that plan in set already, your kids aren't going to be able to keep the farm. Farmers are land rich. We are not cash rich. We cannot afford the death tax. So start succession planning now. Start gifting stuff to your kids so that in the unfortunate timely, they won't be hit so bad with the death tax. So planning, unfortunately, is crucial for farming.
In the back there.
Good morning. One of the things that as a consumer, I was wondering your opinions on any influences that you receive to use genetically modified seeds, plants, etc., as a cost savings for your farm. And are any of these types of influences that may be reaching down to the individual farmer level being exercised through your crop insurance guarantees?
Yeah, so my answer to that is actually fairly simple. There is no differentiation in the federal crop insurance system for genetically modified seed or plants or product versus conventional or versus organic, etc. So the answer is no to that side of it.
So there is a GMO apple, but it's currently only being grown in Canada. We in the United States don't have access to it, so I'm not quite as familiar with GMO law.
I'd like to make a plug. Okay, I don't know if you can hear me better now. I would like to make a plug for GMO. And one thing that people have to remember is that in agriculture, and in the world, our population is growing exponentially faster than it ever has. And to support people on a finite amount of land that is not increasing at the same rate, you need the best agricultural practices to make that happen. The issue with GMO and the bad rap that it has should be offset by the fact that with GMO crop, you can use less water, less nutrients, less inputs, and thus conserving natural resource, while at the same time reducing your carbon footprint compared to conventional and or organic. Your carbon footprint is 10 times that of a GMO or more, maybe less or compared to organic versus GMO, just due to more trips across the field, more hand labor, more investment. So for our secure, safe, healthy food supply that we have here in the United States, GMO is a part of that and probably always will be. I know I've always said that the consumer is stronger than the industry, and you cast your vote at the grocery store when you purchase product, but people need to realize that if you do cast the vote against GMO and you go, say, full organic, you are essentially also okay with, using more inputs, more resources that are finite, and that's something that you should take into consideration.
And also another success story of the GMO is look at the Hawaiian papaya. Because of GMOs, they were actually able to save papayas, and they still grow them in Hawaii. And there was I can't remember the name specifically, but there was a virus going around killing them, and they came up with a resistant GMO. So now they have organic papaya surrounded by GMO papaya, and that's how the two were able to actually work hand in hand.
Could you elaborate on the unionizing pork, I think is what you said, and also the negatives of the new NAFTA on U.S. farmers? A little bit more elaboration on that.
I was referring to the ports. So over on the west side for shipping containers, we're heavily involved with potato industry is primarily the agriculture that I'm involved in, and it's almost all exported frozen French fries, all of which leave on a container on a ship out of Seattle for the most part. And when you have a unionized group controlling the port, we had experienced during that port shutdown or slowdown a loss of transferring product. What that did was we lost customers over in the Pacific Rim. Those Pacific Rim customers, it went somewhere else, and we weren't able to replace those. Except for over time. Same with alfalfa growers. They export a lot of hay, and when the port slowed down, their stacks piled up, prices dropped, and millions and millions and millions of dollars were lost. At least in our area, it was one of the worst direct impact, cause and effect that we've ever had in the last 10 years. And so I was talking about that being a threat to agriculture because they can at any moment decide that they're going to stop. They're going to strike. They're going to close it down. We have no other viable alternatives. We can't ship by plane, and we have no other method, by rail to get to the Pacific Rim. So by having that as a specific threat, that's why I identified it as one of the number one, just because the biggest effect to bottom line for all farmers in our area was when the port shutdown occurred. The shutdown was due to strikes. So a bargaining agreement, they were trying to redo a contract. And with the longshoremen was the union that was responsible for it. They wanted more money, ridiculous more money than they should ever be allowed. And there's an issue with modernization and using technology that exists everywhere else in the world. Why you could timely load a container ship in 10 hours in Europe, but you can't do it here in 3 days, is because we pay a crane operator over $300,000 a year to slowly move that inefficiently, whereas in Europe, they use computers to load, and it's all automated. So there's huge efficiency potential, but due to the, I guess you would call it, the longshoremen essentially have obviously a wicked grip in the economy so trying to break that is next to impossible. And efforts like with the Millennium Bulk Terminal, which I know revolved around coal, down the road could have allowed us other alternatives for getting product to the Pacific Rim, which is why the Millennium Bulk Terminal is such a big deal.
Todd's got a question for you in the back.
So if I knew that I was going to get $6 back for every $1 in premium on my auto insurance, my car would not make it home this weekend. So I appreciate the riskiness and the people talked about the stress of dealing with weather and circumstances beyond your control. But it seems to me at the top of your list, policies that are returning $4, $5, and $6 to $1 of premium is out of whack. Explain to me why those shouldn't be adjusted.
Excellent. I think the emphasis there, and I don't know if this is working, Pam, but the emphasis there is that what I wanted to illustrate was the grower paid loss ratio, because under the Act, they've made it clear that they want it to be a dollar for dollar ratio based on gross premium. So for every dollar paid into the system is paid out to the producer, so it's a net negative effect. The grower paid loss ratio illustration that I showed is simply to show that federal crop insurance, from a risk management standpoint, is worth our time as producers to look into, that it's truly a farm safety net. And I'd like to give actually a great example that James just alluded to and that we're talking about, that port slowdown or closure. In 2014, the apple industry had a lot of whole farm revenue protection policies. That's their principal risk management strategy. And a very simplistic way of looking at it is, my farm operation has a revenue guarantee, a floor. And I don't care if an adjuster comes out there and says, hey, that grain of wheat or that box of apples or whatever is good according to USDA standards. The consumer doesn't want it for whatever reason. The value of it is zero. And I need to get paid a claim off of that because of weather-related quality issues or because of market price decline or something of that nature that's outside of my control. It's an unavoidable disaster. When that happened, because of all the things that have been talked about, and by the way, the apple industry produced far more apples in 2014 than was expected, the price plummeted. And what we saw at Northwest Farm Credit was within our portfolio in the tree fruit industry, you could almost draw a line down the center. As we looked at probability to default ratios and scoring, the line down the center was those that had whole farm revenue protection or crop insurance had minimal shifts in probability to default, they were okay, and those that did not have that proper risk management or the farm safety net really struggled. I think that is a simple testimonial of why the farm safety net's very good, but I know I'm not addressing the question specifically, which is the solvency thing. I would just say from a soundness or solvency thing, if it's $1 in and $1 out from a bigger perspective, then it's technically meeting the objective of what Congress wanted. My illustration of grower paid loss ratio probably sent the wrong signal. The only purpose of it was to show that it's worth your time to look into and to truly understand and implement a strategy that can work in the long term.
I think we had another question over.
So I realize that there's job security when regulators regulate, and as a vegetable grower in South King County and a third-party audited farm, food safety is something that we spend a lot of money on every year. And when it comes to trade, produce coming from other countries, using Mexico as an example, I highly doubt that fake eyelashes and eyelash extensions are banned in the field there like they are banned in the field here. So usually when I rarely go to Mexico on vacation, I'm told not to drink the water. I kind of feel like, as I'm sure most farmers do, like food safety, they used to turn over rocks looking for things, right? And now we're turning over pebbles. We're looking for every single little thing, you know, like filters that are 4.5 feet down in the Green River. How are we checking these filters? Don't mind if I stop and put on my scuba gear in the middle of March when the river's still high. I mean, these things aren't reality for us. Like, they're not things that we can afford to hire to do. They're not things that we're going to do ourselves. Do you guys find that the impact of regulations, especially when it comes to food safety, not only for GAP certification for exporting, but the impact for what's coming back is affecting not only farmers like ourselves trying to grow vegetables, or say the raspberry growers up in Skagit? It's becoming really hard to compete, especially when our minimum wage is high in comparison to you know, the minimum wage of Mexico, like you said, was $7 a day. I mean, we're paying in an hour what they're making in a day. So can you maybe comment on that and elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, so basically, for the consumers, I don't think you really know what we have to go through with Global Gap. I have to test my water 3 times a year, and that's just for what I put on my trees. You know, I doubt they're doing that in other countries. Also, for organic standards, organic standards differ from state to state to state and country to country. There are countries that allow uncooked human waste to be organic manure. Here in Washington State, I have to have certified organic manure, which means whatever animal decided to poop it, it didn't ever have a GMO. So we as farmers definitely need to get out there and tell our story, because these regulations are very burdensome. And unfortunately, with something like Global Gap and even food safety, you know, Global Gap is determined outside of the United States. But if I want to sell my fruit, you know, to Whole Foods or Walmart, who has an operation in either Canada or Mexico, I have to be Global Gap approved. So unfortunately, other than getting directly involved in legislation, last year I worked heavily with the irrigation districts to try to have our own U.S. food safety only test our irrigation water once. It went through, it passed, but unfortunately Global Gap came through and said, no, if you want to be Global Gap, you have to test your water 3 times a year. Each time we test the water from 3 to 5 different sources on our farm, each test costs $50. If I have to do that 3 times a year, that's going to add up quick. So that's why we really have to get out there and, you know, get involved with our legislation, let people know how, you know, these little fees add up and cut into our margin. Short of, you know, banging on legislative doors, I'm really not sure how to influence someone like Global Gap, but definitely being active with our legislator, like getting involved with the irrigation districts, will definitely help ease some of the burdens as far as the U.S. food safety standards.
And I would like to say, and I've said it a couple times, but as a consumer, you cast your vote with what you buy and where you buy it. And the consumer drives what we have to do. And the unnecessary overhead that comes from sustainability audits and gap audits and every industry, big player like McDonald's, Cisco, everyone's coming up with their own, which makes it hard because there's no reciprocity there. And so it just keeps adding on to the overhead. The problem that we have in our country is we support an industry that doesn't have the same standards like was alluded to in Mexico. They do not have the same standards, yet we all love to go buy their cheap asparagus and blueberries from the grocery store. By doing so, you cast the vote for that. I would say that we're a country that has never been hungry. Our generation the generation that I'm a part of has never had to go without a meal, and that speaks volumes. It was actually in Drew's presentation that made me laugh is that second to the military, the best security net for our country is a food safe or is a good food supply system structure, farm network, and making sure that that is capable of supplying the whole United States. Because, and I don't know who to attribute the quote to, but we are only 9 meals away from complete anarchy. So in a well-developed world, we haven't gone without a meal. When you have everyone that has gone 3 days without a meal and not knowing where the next one's coming from, we will have a lot different priorities. So,
And that actually is a concern here in the United States. When you think 1 out of every 5 bites you take, that food comes from another country. It doesn't come from here. So we're slowly outsourcing our food to other countries, and we don't exactly know how that food is grown. That's why it's so important. Go to your grocery store, go, farmer's market. When you go to the grocery store, even your food co-ops, make sure that your food, your produce is coming from the United States. I mean, examples of this, World War I, we were shipping cabbages, over to Europe. World War II, we invented MREs. And so, if the ship sank, these MREs would float to the surface and we'd still have food available. So, food's important for everybody. If we don't have food, we're sunk.
Please join me in thanking my panel. We do have to wrap this up. Please stay tuned. Jason Mercier is up next. He'll be talking about no income taxes. I think we've all heard him say it lots. And please make sure to join us for lunch with Governor Scott Walker.